Welcome back. I am here again with Jon Padgett. Jon, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the last episode, we talked about Jon's work and Ligotti's work. Today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different, but not different for this channel. So Jon's had some paranormal experiences over the course of his life, and we're going to talk about some of those. It's going to be very similar to the interview we did with Laird Barron on some of those experiences. So, Jon, let's get started. And by the way, for the audience, I have no idea what sort of experiences he's going to be. Jon, what's the first one you can remember?
Okay. I went through a period of time in middle school when I was about 11 or 12 during recess. I saw a UFO.
And where was this? Roughly around what time period?
This was in Mobile, Alabama. It would have been 1981, 1982. And I was at St. Paul's Episcopal School.
And what time of year?
It was either fall or spring. It wasn't cold outside.
Was it midday, early morning, early afternoon?
Mid-morning. So broad daylight, clear blue sky. I was by myself. There were other kids playing around, but I didn't have any friends with me when it happened. And it was fast enough that I wasn't able to grab anyone to show them. But over the main campus building, I think probably the high school building, probably about 30 degrees above the horizon, I saw a shape, probably about an inch and a half to my vision, but I could tell it was a really long way off. It had that look of a faded object. It was gray, and I remember it being rectangular, but also with pointed ends. So the ends, it would have been hexagonal, but a long hexagon. And there were maybe 4 or 5 spokes coming out from the corners with solid white lights on the ends. It was very weird looking. And I saw it move. It was slowly moving. It moved a few degrees in my line of sight, what would be considered a few inches to the right. And then it stopped and started going diagonally to the left and suddenly sped up to a blur and disappeared just right in my view. And as I said, this was probably the course of 5 or 6 seconds. And I was, mesmerized, but I'll never forget it. It was very unusual.
What were the conditions in the sky? Was it a clear day? Was it a gray?
Completely clear, clear blue sky. And as I said, it looked to me to be a long distance away. So I was struck by the thought that this object must be very, very large.
And was there any sound?
No sound at all. None that I could hear. Again, this was during recess, so there were kids all around me making noise.
So you didn't feel like there was sort of like a funnel where everything got really quiet around you or anything like that?
No, not at all. Not that I recall. No.
Okay, so you're saying this was in spring or fall 1981?
It was either 81 or 82. I'm not sure. It's possible that it was 1980 because I would have been in 5th or 6th grade. Now that I think of it, it may have been 5th grade, but I'm not certain of that.
And then was there anything you were feeling at the time, your mental state, in terms of like scared, angry, just mesmerized was what you definitely said? But
when I saw it, I had never seen anything like it. And I remember feeling an uncanny sense. It was funny because I remember I didn't feel like I was in a dreamlike state. It wasn't a hallucinatory feeling. In fact, I remember thinking that looks like a real object. I mean, distinct lines. It's obviously far off, but I grew up relatively near an airport, so I saw a lot of flying objects. So I got used to that. And this was completely unlike anything that I had ever seen.
At the time, did you tell anybody what you saw, or did you kind of keep it?
I think I kept it to myself. I may have told a friend at the time, especially at that school. I had maybe two friends. So I may have told them about it, but I don't remember that. I certainly didn't spread it around because at the time, especially at that school, I was being bullied a lot. So and I knew better than to start making some wild claims about seeing UFOs. So I know that it didn't get out that I had seen it. So I probably kept it to myself.
Do you think anybody else saw it, not only in the school, but in the surrounding area?
I don't know. I have no idea. I know none of the other kids saw it. Again, may have been a 5 to 10 second window. When I spotted it, I don't know how long it had been in the sky, but when it started accelerating and then disappeared, of everything, that was the strangest part because I'd never seen an object move like that. I mean, obviously, I had seen helicopters, but the way it stopped and the angle that it started going at and the speed at which it accelerated was unlike anything that I'd ever seen before or since.
Anything else to take away from that experience?
Well, so in about a 2-year period around that time, that's when I experienced most of the strange, unexplainable events. So around that same time, I mean, not within days, but within about a year period of that time, I remember being at the same school, walking to the bathroom. And the way this building was set up is all of the school doors opened to an outside quad, sort of. So to go to the bathroom, you'd go outside and then walk to one corner. So one day I had to go to the bathroom and I went there, and one of the kids that I knew was standing near the door of the bathroom with his face to the wall, which I thought was very strange. I think I may have said something to him as I went by because I was a little concerned that there was something wrong with him because it was just such a weird position to be in and there wasn't anybody else around. So I went into the bathroom and there were two stalls and both of them were occupied. And I turned and that same kid was standing against the wall exactly where he was on the other side, waiting for one of the stalls to open. So I went back outside and he was gone on the other side. But it was at exactly the same place in the wall. It was as if I had seen through the wall. So that was strange. And I never experienced anything like that for that or since then. There was one incident that was very strange. Well before all of this, I was probably 5 or 6. It was an early memory. So I woke up one day convinced that I was a 42-year-old man who had somehow jumped back like Quantum Leap, which of course, this was well before Quantum Leap came out, back into my own body. And I remember that morning rushing to my mom, trying to explain to her that I'm me from the future. I'm 42 years old. And I was trying to explain to her that my memories were leaving me and that I was afraid that I was trapped in some kind of loop. And then sure enough, within 15 or 30 minutes, I lost any kind of memory of that. So I only speculate now that I had a dream to that effect. And
are you familiar with the concept of retrocausality?
To some degree, yeah, a little bit. Not much, but yeah.
So I've done interviews with a ton of these former military remote viewers and also people who were trained by them. And there's an interview I did with Lori Williams, who teaches remote viewers, and she was trained by Lynn Buchanan and I think Mel Riley, she used to work with a lot, who are former military remote viewers. And there is this concept where they're called temporal loops or time loops. And there are ways of using remote viewing to reach into the past and provide guidance to yourself. And then sometimes like strange things will happen. So there's a story about Lynn Buchanan where he was going to sign to buy a house, and he felt this extremely strong tap on his arm, knocking his arm away from the page. So for whatever reason, he decided not to sign that contract. And then it turned out there was some other house that came up for sale that was perfect, that they got for a lot cheaper, etc. So what he endeavored to do was, several years in the future, he endeavored to complete that time loop. So he just concentrated very hard on that moment. And then he just smacked the hell out of his arm in order to complete that loop. And just quick background, people who follow the show know all about Lynn Buchanan, but for people who don't, have you seen The Men Who Stare at Goats?
No.
So it is a mockery of all these side programs that the government did, but the George Clooney character was based loosely off of Lynn Buchanan, among others. But he was discovered because he took down all the skiffs in Western Europe. So skiffs being the special compartmented information facilities where you could do classified information. And subsequently, after the Cold War, they found out whatever the equivalent on the Soviet side was, he took down all of those too, when he just got really upset when a coworker messed with a presentation that he was delivering in front of 12 allied generals from NATO, right? So he had this ability, but it was immediately classified. They had to pretend for an amount of time that, again, is still classified to this day, to continue working when all these gifts were down, right? So they were doing crossword puzzles and things like that, but they had to stay in the room so that the Soviets didn't know. But that's how he was discovered to participate in their remote viewing program. So anyway, I didn't mean to take it that far.
No, that's interesting.
So the question for you is, when you were 42 years old, did you have a dream where you went back and were in your 5-year-old body and were trying to explain all this stuff? Or did you have an incident?
Not that I recall, but throughout the whole year that I was 42, I was a little concerned that I was going to wake up one day as a little kid, and I was relieved when I turned 43 because of that.
Yeah, look, it could also be, again, I've never experienced much, if any, of this sort of thing, but I know plenty of people who have. And my view is, like, we only see in a narrow range, like our sensors, so to speak. So sight, hearing, things like that. We're only experiencing a fraction of reality. And I think that there are some people who hallucinate this. There's some people who are making it up for financial gain, but I don't think it's everybody. In fact, I don't think it's the largest percentage of people. So I think I'm not somebody who's going to pound the table and say UFOs definitely exist or psi ability definitely exists, but the evidence certainly points in that direction. So I believe, but I don't know. And I'm also not one to immediately discount accounts of what happens, because I think much of this is all related. In fact, I think your UFO experiences, and again, things are so compartmented in this country that people who are UFO investigators scoff at people who claim that psi ability or ESP exists, who also scoff at paranormal investigators like ghost hunters. But what tends to happen, if you talk to somebody like a Preston Dennett, who is a highly credible UFO investigator, typically when people have these experiences, they also have associated paranormal experiences, poltergeist activity, things like that. With Lynn Buchanan, as an example, he had an abduction experience that he didn't remember until he got involved in the remote viewing program, and then something triggered it. And then he went to hypnotherapy, and was able to learn more about it there. And then, without telling his colleagues about his experience, he gave them coordinates to remote viewers and had them remote view the experience, and they reported back his experience. And there was another incident that happened that I won't go into that really cemented it. But a lot of these things can be nebulous and you're not really sure what's happening. Long story short, all the stuff that you were talking about seems to have happened in that 2-year period when you saw that UFO. So this is pretty common, actually, in terms of people who report seeing things like that. Poltergeist activity typically turns out to be psi-related phenomena. So what growing up, Lynn Buchanan had poltergeist activity, but it was really him. Right? Like shutting off lights and things like that.
Yeah. So the other notable paranormal instances that I've had is probably a year or two after the events that I've mentioned. I believe I was in 7th grade. And I remember it well because there was a girl that I had a crush on who was very popular at the school and very nice and smart. I had told one of my friends at the time that I had a crush on her, and he told.
Of course he did.
So it got out during lunch, and kids started making fun of me and laughing at me in the cafeteria. I rushed out. It was probably not a terribly uncommon experience.
It's bringing back memories. It's bringing back not memories, but like emotional memories. I can't remember what it was, but I can feel it when you're saying this stuff.
Yeah.
Because everybody's experienced something like this.
So I ran out of the cafeteria it felt like the whole cafeteria laughing at me, and went to the nurse's office in the big building that I had mentioned before. It wasn't just a high school building, it was a middle school building too. So I had them call my parents to go home sick, and the nurse left the room. So the nurses stationed that there was a little room where students could stay that was separate from the rest of the office. It was just her, and she walked out. She was gone. The door of the room that I was in was ajar inward, so I could see the entire door. And I was very upset, and I was crying, and suddenly I felt this incredible rage build up inside me. I looked at the door and I said, "Close." And the door slammed shut. And then I was like, whoa. And of course, after that, I was trying to move all sorts of objects with my mind.
Was there a breeze or anything like that?
There was no breeze or anything like that. And the door slammed shut so hard that it shook the floor. I remember that.
So the interesting part about this, given what you were talking about, everything that happened before, what was your emotional state?
I was incredibly humiliated and self-loathing and angry and desperate. But it was like all of that turned into kind of this laser focus all at once. I don't know why. I guess I wanted privacy, or I was embarrassed, and it just happened. And after that, as I said, I tried and tried for months after that, and periodically after that, trying to move things with my mind, and always have had a lot of telekinetic dreams before and after that, and nothing strange of that nature specific to me trying to move something with my mind happened until I was much older, young adult, college age, and a little beyond when I was in grad school. So the second occurrence, I was at the beach, and I was an older high school student at the time. I was with some friends at the beach, and we were in a beach house, and we started trying to summon spirits or something. And during this seance, the chandelier started moving back and forth, which freaked all of us out. And of course, we stopped doing it, but that could have been a lot of things, including air. The only other direct telekinetic experience that I had was when I was in grad school, and a friend of mine was over, and we decided to try to make a pencil move. We were probably about 4 feet away from it. And for whatever reason, both of us really got into it and concentrated for a long, long time. I mean, it must have been 30 minutes or an hour of trying to make the thing move. And finally, it moved and rolled off. It was in the middle of the table or a little beyond, and it rolled off the other side of the table from us. And both of us got completely freaked out and scared and actually went out onto the balcony of the apartment because we were so freaked out that that actually happened. And again, my mind rationalizes things like that and says, oh, well, this was just either my friend was blowing at it somehow, or there was some kind of current or what have you. But yeah, that's pretty much that.
So what emotional state were you in when you may have potentially moved the pencil?
I would say meditative, focused. Yeah.
And then in the chandelier incident, you were clearly in a heightened emotional state.
Yeah.
So fear, not necessarily anger,
Mm-hmm.
but that seems to be out of the 2 out of 3, it seems to be the emotional state. Because I'm guessing in the humiliation, there's some fear in that.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that, I would say that of those 3 experiences, the one that is hardest for me to reconcile is the door, because it was a solid door and there weren't any weird breezes. There wasn't cross current. It was an enclosed room, and the other one was an enclosed office, and I could see the entire door. So it's not like it just coincidentally somebody closed the door or something. That was really strange. That was in relatively close proximity to the UFO and the weird bathroom X-ray event.
Do you have any instances of missing time?
It's a good question. I was a strange kid. I used to spend a lot of time by myself in the backyard. I would try to control the weather. I would try to control the direction the wind was coming from.
There's a book that you should check out called PK Man. I think it's by Jeffrey Mishlove. And it's about exactly that. A guy who, there's a lot of craziness in this, but it would be a drought in California. And he'd say, I'll come out and solve it. So he would come out, and then it would rain and rain and rain, and the drought would end. And I think they did the same thing somewhere else, might have been in the UK. They had a drought. So he went, I'll end it. So he went, and it rained and rained and rained. And then he left, and somebody said, oh, he didn't do that. Well, I'll make sure there's another drought. So he went back out, and there was a drought. So there are a lot of it gets even freakier because somebody was making fun of him or something like that. So he called Jeffrey Mishlove and said, you better call NASA to stop that shuttle launch because it's going to come down.
Oh, wow.
And the Challenger explosion happened. So again, it could be that he's precognitive and seeing this stuff happen. It could be that he was causing it, or it could be wild coincidence. But I haven't read the book, but the book covers much of the stuff that you're talking about.
Have you ever seen the Medusa Touch?
No, what's that?
It was a supernatural horror film. It starred Richard Burton and Lee Remick. And it's about this guy who could make catastrophes happen. And it's it's British made, but it's a really good movie. Really, really, really good. I think it's on Amazon Prime. I'm not sure if it's free or not, but it may be. And I saw a very key part of it when I was 7 or so at my grandmother's house. And it had a big impact on me. In fact, it made an impact on what I would later write as well. Check it out. It was made in 78 or was released in 78. So it's very much a 70s movie, but only in the same way that The Exorcist is. It's got kind of a slow pace, but the third act is just insane. It's got a great ending.
I will definitely check that out because The Exorcist, that is the only movie that scared me, but I think it was because, like you, I grew up Catholic. So it has a particular resonance for Catholics.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I only saw little bits and pieces of it before I was in college, I think. That's when I saw it. But it scared me even then. When I think about the other movie that comes to mind that actually scared me was John Carpenter's The Prince of Darkness.
Oh, I love that movie. I
That one
absolutely love that movie.
Yeah, it's my favorite of his, which is kind of an unusual favorite, I guess. But it absolutely terrified me when I was in college and watched it for the first time. I mean, it wasn't in the theater either. It was just a rental, I think.
The thing I love most about that movie is it was more fascination than fear, right? Where they're looking at these ancient scrolls with these monks were putting together and they were doing differential equations. And it was just like, this is amazing. And there's this metamorphosis occurring in real time that's connected to some portal that only opens in certain times. And anyway, it was one of my favorite. I mean, The Thing is going to be my favorite John Carpenter film, but
right.
This one's definitely up there.
Yeah, and I agree that Thing is a superior film. It's just that very rarely ever actually been scared. The one other movie that comes to mind that actually scared me, which I did see in the theater, was Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, really? That one again fascinated me, but yeah, it is pretty.
It really freaked me out, but there hasn't been much else that I can.
It's probably how they morph the faces. Is that kind of the
the thing that can get under my skin is a sense of reality breaking down. And Jacob's Ladder does so well with that, with the protagonist's life just unraveling and not being sure what's real and what's not real. In the Mouth of Madness does well with that as well.
I don't know where I saw this, but somebody was recounting a trip that they did with you. Familiar with DMT?
Mm-hmm.
And as part of the trip, at the very end, it was like, okay, you have to go back now. Where do you want to go? And then he's like, what do you mean? Well, were you wearing a blue shirt or a red shirt? And it's like, I don't know. Well, pick one. So the traveler or the psychonaut, I guess what they call themselves, didn't know if he returned to the same reality that he left.
Yeah.
So like there's, and I actually think, going back to the Ligotti discussion, he does that really well. We were talking about the frolic right before this interview in the movie. And it's just, it has that sense like, where's this being from?
Right.
I don't know. He's not really a prisoner, right? He's clearly not a prisoner. He clearly wants to be where he wants to be. And there's a lot of interesting play with fundamental nature of reality, which I think what we see is very limited, given or very limited sensory organs. And I think we have other non-physical senses that we just have completely underdeveloped.
Yeah, I was curious about an article that I saw and just briefly scanned through just this morning, talking about two studies that posit or that give some evidence that our brains are quantum computers, complete with quantum entanglement.
Well, I think neuroscience would say that everything is contained in the brain, your thoughts and things like that. But I don't think that's true. I think brains are more akin to a modern computer. It's like an antenna, right? You have things coming in from the ether and then it's interpreting. And like what we're doing right now, this interview, my computer is not connected directly to the internet. It's over wireless. Right? Neuroscientists would be like, you are a Luddite, you're an idiot. But sometimes you have thoughts that are your own voice, but they're not your own.
Yeah, I never had any abduction sort of experience, but there have been times in my life where I've been either close to sleep or have woken up in the middle of the night and felt like I was downloading vast amounts of information into my brain. And I would see colorful geometrical shapes that made sense to me at the time, but that lost all of their meaning afterwards. But I came away with the sense that I've just been programmed somehow, or I received some kind of data. It's a strange experience. It's a strange world.
So here's a strange story that happened to my family, not to me, but to my family. So as I started to engage with all this stuff, when I started this YouTube channel, my journey with all this stuff didn't begin until 2018 when I read a book called Psychic Warrior by former Army major named David Morehouse. And it detailed Project Stargate and things like that. So I got intrigued by it because I served as a combat arms officer in the U.S. Army. So everything that he told me was consistent with how the Army worked. And so he's the real deal. The CIA has a website where they have all their declassified documents. So you can see some of these remote viewing sessions that have been declassified. So the government, despite what the face they put on it right now, where they were actively using these phenomena to gather intelligence, right, for at least 20 years. And I believe they're still, from bits and pieces, from interviews and things like that, I'm pretty sure that they're still doing it, more likely on a contractor basis than anything else, but they're still doing it.
Well, so, what was the name of that book?
Psychic Warrior.
Mm.
And it's by a guy named David Morehouse. It originally came out from St. Martin's Press. So I have a son who's just turned 4. And we used to play games. Every time we would go on a long trip, we would just rent a car to avoid wear and tear in ours.
Sure.
So I would always ask him before we go, what color is the car going to be? And statistically, the right answer is white. If you say white, you're going to get it right 38% of the time. So, the first time he says white, the car's white. The second time he says white, the car's white, right? So the probability of that is about 14%. Okay. But still, if he keeps saying white, doesn't mean anything. Right. So one day, 2 packages come in from Amazon. He runs to one package, picks it up, and says Avengers book. Now, I didn't buy the book. My wife didn't buy the book. It came from a relative because his birthday was coming up. So if I shook the box, I could probably tell it was a book. But I had no idea what was in it and where it came from. But my wife ran over to me and she said, I opened the box and there was an Avengers book.
That reminds me of one experience that I forgot when I was very little. And this was an early memory. I was like 3 or 4. And my granddaddy called us on the phone, a landline, of course. This would have been 73, 74. And I picked up the phone and I remember being on the phone with him and I remember seeing him. I had an image of him in his big toe bleeding. And I said, Granddaddy, why is your big toe red? And he had just injured himself and his toe was freely bleeding and it completely freaked him out. But I had the memory of seeing it, but I was on the gray phone at the same time. Yeah, kids are creepy and strange.
Yeah, I think this is something we all have. It's just dormant, or someone or something does not want this to be developed. Because just think about it, if everybody could develop these capabilities all at once, it would cause a lot of chaos, right? And
absolutely,
the powers that be have a huge disincentive. It would be a huge disincentive for them to encourage it, because then secrets become much harder to hide. And some secrets are worth hiding, like defense-related things that protect the country. But a lot of things, if people knew the truth, they would probably be pretty upset. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
But I don't know. I don't really have a theory or notion, but it just seems like either we're just not there yet as a species, or whatever this is has been actively suppressed, or for some other reason. I don't know. But the more I learn about this stuff, the more I feel like there's something to it.
Absolutely.
Any final words from the audience? And this has been a fascinating discussion, so thank you.
Yeah. No, it has. I used to be much more of a believer in the paranormal. I've become more skeptical as I've gotten older, but I've been aware of my skepticism growing because of proximity and just time. It's been a long time since anything truly uncanny has happened to me, but I think that probably part of that is being more closed off from it as years go by. Especially as adults, we get set in our ways. We like routine and we like stability and closing doors with your mind.
Yeah, you're pruning off neural pathways
like
as you get older.
Yeah,
it's like brain plasticity, right? Your brain becomes less plastic or like malleable as you grow older. You're shutting off neural pathways.
Yeah. So all of this to say, I am at this point. I would probably say that I'm agnostic when it comes to it. I also believe that there is so much that we don't understand. And that's just almost a cliche. It's obvious that we're interpreting what we call reality in a certain way. And so open to new things.
Look, I think there's probably a scientific explanation for all this stuff. So, likely quantum mechanical sort of explanation, whereas time is simultaneous. We just perceive this thing called time that doesn't really exist. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
All right, my friend. It was a pleasure, and I hope to see you at some point in the future.
Yep. Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.